Welcome, everyone. It is my pleasure to be your MC for our Braver Angels event today, helping loved ones divided by politics. Real conversation, tough conversations. Politics is tough. It always has been. American politics is competitive, thrilling, frustrating, and irritating. It reminds me of when I was an athlete. Boy, I was so competitive. Just politics is the same. The stakes are high. Issues are important. Outcomes matter. This is why we care at Braver Angels and should care about our beloved American politics. But do our politics have to be polarizing? So, to set the mood for this workshop, we will open with a song called The Great Divide. Singer songwriter Caswell entered this song in the Braver Angels songwriting contest, and the story it tells is the perfect frame for our work today.
Nana was a registered Republican, and Pappy was a Democrat for life. You never heard a word of anger pass between that husband and his wife. People kinda wondered why they bothered to even take the time to put on coats and go out to the schoolhouse on a Tuesday night to cancel out their votes. There used to be. There was a time we could agree to disagree. Before the slide into the great divide. Now every word I hear about my country feels like gasoline poured on a flame. Seems like everybody's picking sides and picking fights and calling names. Everywhere I look I see the anger. Every conversation fills with trolls. Everybody knows the party lines. We wave our signs, we play our roles. Used to be. This land of us and them was made for you and me. But I guess that died in the great divide. And yes, I know you didn't start this fight, and I've heard the other side is more to blame. And I know that there's a wrong and right, and we can't afford to lose this game. We're all losing just the same. 'Cause we get kinda stupid when we're angry. It's easier to hurt a herd that hates. They play us like a sucker on the line each time we rise to click the bait. Oh, but there's a simple, hard solution, older than the oldest grudge you've nursed. Someone's gonna have to lay their sword down, but someone's gonna have to do it first. And it seems to me we've forgotten who's a friend or enemy. And you'll recall that a house divided surely is gonna fall. Fall for spite and fall for pride into the great divide. Nana was a registered Republican, Pappy was a Democrat for life.
Excellent. You have just heard Judd Caswell sing The Great Divide. Today we have two people, Kathy and Matt, who will journey into this divide by sharing their stories and become vulnerable, which is beautiful. They are our teachers and our real heroes. Remember, we are here in Braver Angels fashion to listen, not to try to change minds, but have dialogue, just as my hero Frederick Douglass once said, the slave become emancipated because he is able to make the argument for his freedom and to build a house united. Today we will learn some communication techniques and perhaps experience some aha moments with Dr. Bill Doherty, who is our co-founder of Braver Angels and creator of the Braver Angels workshops. Bill is a professor at the University of Minnesota, where he teaches marriage and family therapy. Somebody who's been there and done it. Bill says, I'm in our workshops. We stress that it's important for families in our country that we try. We have to at least try, said Doherty. That's the importance of this work. There is no way out of this except together as one heartbeat. My heart is beating. Bill is going to be with the family members, Kathy and Matt. They are cousins, wonderful cousins, who have volunteered to share their story and help all of us learn new ways to manage our political difference for the sake of our relationship. Now, I would love to introduce Dr. Bill Doherty and Kathy and Matt. Enjoy.
Welcome to our Braver Angels family here. There's about over 100 folks who have tuned in. I want to express our gratitude to both of you for coming and sharing what your story is and helping us all learn. And as Ron said in his intro, he sort of smiled when he said cousins, because a family where cousins would be really interested in their relationship and improving their relationship and around politics is not that common a thing. So maybe we could start by just, Kathy, I know you're from Florida, right? And Matt, New York City. But you obviously, when you were kids, you weren't that far away. So if you would just tell us about your childhood cousin experience. And so Kathy, could you go first?
Absolutely. So Matt and I grew up just about 45 minutes from each other, and our fathers are brothers. They're 2 of 5. And all of the brothers and sisters lived very close to each other, and our family was a very tight unit. So we were together often. And we each of the individuals had kind of small families. So we were together a lot at our grandmother's house, and it was kind of the central place for us to gather. And being so close, it could really have been on a weekly basis for a lot of our childhood. So we spent a lot of time together, and it was wonderful. But one thing that made it kind of not so adversarial, but on the other extreme, is when we would get to things where we would perhaps disagree, we just wouldn't go any further. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm getting older, and Matt and I both work, with politics to certain degrees on opposite, obviously, sides of the aisle, and we realize that even though we grew up together, we don't really know each other that well, or we don't really know each other in a deep, intimate level, because we just didn't go there. Mm-hmm. And so now that, I'm 43, I'm at kind of the halftime of my life, and I want to have more significant relationships going forward. And Matt and our family is certainly very significant to me. And so we need to then have those deeper relationships. And to do that, we have to go there. And we realize once we start to, it can get contentious. So that's why we kind of have come to you and hope that you can give us tools to be able to have more intimate, deeper relationships, and give us the tools to be able to get there.
Okay. All right. And so Matt, a little bit of your background together and your families, and then Kathy did a nice job of moving right into why you guys are here. So maybe you could answer both of those.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with all that there were stop points, in conversations that touched on religion, politics, and I think that's a form of divide that didn't let us dig deeper. And I was just curious, how I have a blood relative, who sees things differently than I do. We're both active in politics, which is interesting. So I wanted to know more and figure out what's some of the origin of that and how that plays out on a day to day. So I couldn't have added too much more than what Kathy just said.
Yeah. And just a little bit more about how you grew up together, your families. So that part of it, what was that like to grow up with those two families so connected to each other?
I think it was interesting, having our grandmother's house is kind of the focal point. I don't remember many political conversations, to be honest with you. And I think maybe that's a reflection of growing up in the 80s and early 90s, that it wasn't as polarized and all up in your face as it is today. So I think that just leaves me, like I said, curious to know how things are today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and how that we grew up, in each other's spaces, literally and figuratively, for the first 18, 19, 20 years of our lives, and how now both of us, dabbling in different political arenas, having shared the same childhood, being so far apart. How does that happen? And then how do we kind of bridge that together?
Yeah. So just for folks looking in, so Kathy, you lean, we use red and blue language, and which way do you lean?
I look wonderful in red.
Okay. And Matt, and these are all complicated, but we talk about leaning red or blue. So which way do you lean?
Yeah, blue. I guess this is blue, and I noticed Judd, the musician, had the same shirt. Great taste. I'm in probably one of the bluest congressional districts in the country, and I work and got a degree from Columbia, which is also just colored light blue. So that's my deal.
Yeah. Okay. And that's why you're here, right? Because that's Braver Angels brings reds and blues together. So let's get right into what happens when you communicate, when you try to communicate with each other about things political. What are the challenges that you guys experience? And Kathy, maybe you could go first.
Well, for me, I think, part of my kind of growing within myself is I realize I'm a fight or flight, and I peace out. So if it gets really controversial, I'll just stop. And what that does is it stops the relationship. It stops the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so now what I'm trying to do is engage more, go back into the fight. And fight maybe isn't the best word for it, but that's kind of what it is. It's go back to, to the mat with him. And, but then you get to a point where you're stuck, because I feel so strongly, he feels so strongly. Matt is incredibly well educated, obviously is in education, and also being, I think, male and female, where he comes from a much more kind of, he likes the facts and the research, and I'm more about what does that mean and what's behind that and what's the emotion of it. And so that then also causes a totally different divide, where we just can't figure out how to meet each other where we are.
So from your point of view, there's communication style differences as well as the content differences. And then at some point you withdraw.
Right.
And are hoping to do less of that. So Matt, how would you characterize the challenges you guys face in talking politics?
Yeah, I think for me, there's kind of almost a fear of digging into some of these things, because we love each other and I don't want to, dig to hit a nerve or something like that. So what I do is stop when I sense things getting a little frustrating, and then sometimes I'll internalize that frustration. I think a lot of people do that too, where they're maybe frustrated at a family conversation, and with other members of my family, that's true too. And then they'll kind of use that as a motivation to just, to go out and spread that frustration. And I don't want to do that. So.
Okay. So when things sort of stop between you, you don't want to hurt the relationship. You love Kathy, but then you feel frustrated and sort of, how does it play out then, that frustration? You say in other arenas, what happens?
Well, I mean, I have like a newsletter that is all about civic participation and action, and it's separate from my work. It's independent, so it could be partisan. So it's, Kathy mentioned fight or flight. It's kind of like the fighting aspect of what could I do on a daily basis to push back against the right, and especially the far right, and also, mobilize communities that I work with.
Yeah, and what you're saying though is that there's a little bit of extra frustration or tension that goes into that, you think, because of the difficulty of connecting inside the family.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and then, when you don't get to a neutral place, you can get bitter, you can get resentful. And that, instead of me being resentful or mad at Matt, it's the whole blue side. It's everything
Blue
blue.
side.
And it's just, I'm just mad at everything blue. And that's not healthy either. So being able to have the tools to be able to go there and get to a neutral place will maybe neutralize some of that tension.
Yeah. You both articulated something very interesting there, that if we sometimes we want to preserve a close relationship, and so we don't want to fight too much there, but then we fight we fight the other side. We become gladiators for that cause. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, in our prior setup conversation, we agreed that you'd give us a look at how a conversation may go between the two of you around a controversial issue. And if you recall, you chose statues, taking down statues, which is big issue in the country. It seems like there are lots of big issues in the country, and that's one of them. And so, if you'd be willing to just take a few minutes and Kathy, maybe I'll have you go first on this to bring it up, and just have a conversation with each other. I'll just listen in for a few minutes, and don't at this point try to be the self you want to be, be the self you are. Okay. In other words, just show us how it goes when you end up maybe a little bit frustrated with each other, and then we'll do some work on maybe how to do that better. Does that sound good? You ready to go?
Yes.
So talk to each other rather than to me at this point.
Okay.
So Kathy, go for it.
So Matt, a while ago, not too long ago, you had made a comment about, and it was a roll your eyes comment about statues. Oh, the next thing is they're going to be, taken, trying to fight about statues or something. And I just kind of laughed it off because, again, I didn't want to go there. And then the more I thought about it, I realized, so you're saying it's fine to just take them all down. And I completely disagree. And instead of going back to you and saying, I totally disagree, let's talk about this, I just got mad. I got ticked off. I thought you have no idea the damage that we're doing to the next generation by just saying, oh, let's just take it all down. And I was ticked. And I didn't talk to you for a while because I was ticked.
Yeah, so that happened. That's a good start here, because that was an earlier conversation. So why don't you let's have the conversation now. So let's not go back, revisit the other one. Okay. So with that as the preface, why you have a head of steam up on this, Kathy. So have the conversation now. So in other words, just say where you are.
Okay. I think it's absolutely insane that is even a public policy issue now. The fact that city councils are even discussing what we do about these statues. They represent a time in history, and it's a slippery slope for us to be erasing history. We're doing it in our textbooks, we're doing it in our schools, and we're doing it in statues. I mean, a statue, you can view it as a work of art. You can view it as a time capsule of history. And if you don't like it, and certainly there are statues that represent something that you may or may not like, then you can discuss it. You can bring your children by and say, look at this statue. It bothers me because it represents a time that, or this individual did something that I don't necessarily agree with. But that doesn't mean that you rip it down. It doesn't mean that you go and spray paint it, or an angry mob gets together and goes and pulls it down in the middle of the night. That's anarchy. I think there's absolutely no place in our society to have that kind of anarchy. And I think make it a teaching moment, make it an opportunity to say, this is how I feel about things. Obviously, the people who voted to put this up feel differently about it. Or if you live in a city where, 9/10 of the community thinks it's an abomination, then you go through the proper channels of, bringing it to a vote. But again, I think that's a slippery slope. I think once you start erasing parts of history, where do you stop? I mean, if we really are taking down statues with the basis of character of the person, we would erase all of history. All of us have character flaws. So you want to take down statues of the people because their character flaws, mean more to you than to somebody else. I mean, I just think once you start that, there's no stopping it.
Yeah. I don't know if that's been the case where we've seen the slippery slope, because if I walk around, I see plenty of statues, and I live, like I said, in one of the deepest blue areas. And, as an example, I'll walk in the Columbia main campus, and when I see this library, this super imposing building built 100 years ago, whose names do I see etched in, right? It's going back 2,000 years, Plato, Aristotle, and through a little more recently, the founding fathers, and then some writers, and they're all one person. They're all one white guy. And so what kind of message does that send to somebody who isn't a white male who's coming on a campus to learn? It's basically, this is history and deal with it. And so when you say we want to erase history, I think history hasn't been correctly written. And so basically we haven't been taught real history. So if we're just replicating the same things, sure, Plato has plenty of great things to say. But if we're just replicating the same person over and over and over, we're missing what history really is. And, I know you like going back to personal responsibility a lot. And I heard that in your statement about, if someone has a problem with it, they could just discuss it. It's a teachable moment. And that gets back to putting the onus of responsibility on the person in the family walking your kids. Oh, that's a mounted, soldier on a horse. What does that mean? And I think there's nothing wrong with discussing stuff with your family and digging in. But again, like, it's already there. It's already in bronze. It's already etched in stone or carved. Then the decision's already been made for you, the person on the street or the citizen. And, just quick example of when and how these things were made. They were erected. We'll look at, post-Civil War South. And it was when, Reconstruction was happening, and it was starting to work. And Black folks were starting to get elected. And so that made a lot of white people uncomfortable. And so what happened? Jim Crow laws started coming up. And what else? Statutes, right? And statues. So the statues start coming up, and the statues of Confederate leaders started popping up all over the South about 100 years ago. It wasn't until the late 1800s to early 20th century that there was this huge push to erect all these statues. So what message is that sending? That's saying we're in control, and Reconstruction is in the past, and we're gonna emphasize this group of individuals. So I think it's true in the South. I think it's true in the North. I think it's true throughout the country that there wasn't a critical examination of what message we're sending when we erect these statues. So I think there's a lot of investigation that we haven't done yet. And sometimes, I'm not necessarily for tearing them all down in a physical way, every single one, but I'm all for a tearing down of our assumptions.
I think you're putting an awful lot onto an inanimate structure. I mean, I don't think a statue in the middle of a town square is going to stop racism or create racism. I think it's a thing. It's a thing that people pass by all the time. And I think it's ridiculous that we're putting personality and emotion and social change onto an inanimate object. I think it's nuts. I think it's time in history. I think it's a thing. And I think that, I think there's a lot of blue, colorful rallies around this inanimate statue trying to make it something that it's not. It's a thing. I mean, no one's trying to pull down the Colosseum because of what happened in Rome back then. It's a thing. It's an inanimate object, and I can't stand toll booths. I hate that I have to pay like $20 to go over the Tappan Zee Bridge, but I'm not going to rip it down. I'm going to pay the toll and talk to my kid about fiscal responsibility. I mean, I just think, again, putting personality into inanimate structures isn't going to change anything.
I mean, when it's in a civic square, it's there for everyone. It's intentionally there to make a point. What is the point that's being made? And there's other inanimate objects that have really important value. They have spiritual value. We build churches out of stone. We build the US Capitol out of stone. But don't tell me the US Capitol is not a significant place. Why was it attacked and invaded, in January 6th by a right-wing mob? Because they knew it had significance. By the way, why aren't we taught in most elementary and high school classes that it was built with slave labor? I've read the apologies about oh, well, there were handbills and ads put out to help build the Capitol and the White House, but they couldn't find people who would work for that amount of money. Well, no, duh. No one's going to work for what's basically slave wages or indentured servitude wages, right? So they created a system where they had to get slaves. There's like, well, there's slaves around, so let's just use them. So our capital, right, was built with slave labor. We just haven't addressed it. And I think what a lot of these monuments get down to is deciding who gets to tell the story about racism in America.
Okay, guys. So let me stop you. I want to. So thank you for teeing it up and going into it here. How much, Kathy, did this feel like what you guys have done in the past, or how much did it feel different?
Well, I think we're going forward with it. Like, we want to see the argument through to the end, which normally we don't. So I think we're both motivated to see it through.
And so what would have happened in the past if you started this?
The second that he started to throw facts and figures at me, I would have washed my hands of it.
Okay. And so, Matt, your take on how similar or different this was from other conversations you guys have?
Well, I could feel the heat in my body. I could that internalized kind of frustration I'm telling you about. That doesn't normally happen because we'll just like go past the turkey and mashed potatoes, and that's a wrap. So I feel like that's a good thing. To feel a little bit uncomfortable. So it's to me it's a little bit further than I think we would normally go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what you were doing, Kathy, was trying to hang in there more in this conversation, and partly, Matt, it sounds like you appreciated that in some way because you felt more sort of personally engaged. Because some of what sounds like could happen in the past would be you might start, and then when you would engage some of the history, Matt, some of the the broader context and so on, and Kathy, you would then say to yourself what?
I'd roll my eyes and be like, yeah, I'm out.
What would you tell yourself at that point?
Well, I just continue the conversation in my head.
In your head?
Yeah,
okay.
like this is irrelevant. This is, I wasn't alive 300 years ago when that decision was made. It doesn't apply to me. I'm out.
So, but in terms of what's happening in your relationship, it's sort of like nothing you're going to say is going to.
Nothing's going to make it any better. So I'm going to stop.
Okay. You're not going to get through. Nothing's going to come from this, and then you withdraw.
Yeah, and like you said, that heat, you just feel that rising, and you have to decide, I'm either going to go for the jugular or I'm going to back off.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you both were really strong and powerful here. And I can see where that could threaten your bond. And neither of you really gave much to the other side here. I mean, you made your points. A number of them. So I want to return to in a minute to how you talk to each other here. But first, I'd like to back up and have you do some reflection on what your family experiences. You shared an extended family, a close extended family. What did your family experiences give you think that might be in common? I mean, so you differ politically, you differ on this issue. Are there some things that you got from your families growing up, particularly your extended family, that makes you similar to each other in some way?
Well, our family really stressed education. I mean, all of our aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings are all phenomenally well educated. So I think that's something that's important. So we do our homework to some extent, about whatever issue we bring to the table. It's not all emotion.
Yeah. How about you, Matt? What's something you guys have in common from your family?
Yeah, I think on that side of my family, there's a dearth of emotion actually, which is kind of frustrating for me. But I think, growing up like with heavy exposure to Protestantism, our grandfather was a minister and Kathy's dad was a minister. I grew up Catholic, so I think what I appreciated about the Protestant world is sense of community.
Yeah.
Getting together for donuts after church is a fun thing, especially when you're young. Like, I'll stick around. And Catholic, we don't do that as much.
Yeah. And it's so there was would you agree about the emphasis on education and kind of knowing your facts? Was that another thing, Matt?
Yeah, I do remember definitely debates. It's not like there were no debates or whatever, but they were kind of stoic and sometimes fact oriented.
Okay.
Occasionally there'd be like a wild card kind of situation.
Okay.
Kathy knows what I'm talking about, but yeah, it was pretty like academic.
Yeah.
But Matt's right in terms of the dearth of emotion. I mean, when you have the people that love hard and the big hugs and all of that and the heavy laughter, that's an intimacy that comes with going to the mat with people on the other side as well.
Okay.
And so we didn't do that. So we lacked kind of any kind of intimacy, and that really was void of emotion.
Yeah. Okay. And then what life experiences other than family do you think for you, Kathy, moved you in the more conservative red direction politically? So what led you there?
I'm going to back up for just a second and
Yeah.
say the fact that what we do share is that kind of really lack of intimacy and emotion growing up has affected all of my relationships as an adult.
Okay.
So it is something that this is important to me that you give us tools, because it's not just about my relationship with Matt, but it's about my relationships in general.
Yeah.
So that's first. But second, so I grew up on a military base with a lot of statues of generals and presidents and great leaders, and they inspired me. And they again, were just objects that you'd pass by, or you'd say, I'll meet you at MacArthur statue in 20 minutes or something. And it was just kind of a meeting point.
Yeah.
And so it didn't have the same kind of negative emotion to me that it would maybe to Matt. But I grew up in a conservative Christian home. My father was a minister and on a military base. And then my intimate relationships going forward tended to be with men in the military, because clearly I had a type growing up, the way I did. And people in the military tend to be a little bit more to the red color. And so that just kind of kept me in that arena. And then I ended up, working with people running for conservative politics.
Yeah.
And it fit those candidates kind of fit my viewpoints. So it was easy for me.
Yeah. Oh, and the statue too. Wow, that's interesting. All the statues are meet you at Douglas MacArthur. Okay. Right. Okay. And Matt, how about you? Your life experiences that moved you in the blue direction, you think?
Yeah, and it wasn't just any military base, Kathy. It was West Point. So it was like it was the center of I can't sum it up, but basically going there was a significant experience because everything was stone and serious and staid. And then the cadet chapel was like the epicenter of that. So it was like a layer of military seriousness and then a layer of like religious seriousness. That's what I got from it as a visitor. And that was interesting having, my uncle is a religious leader, and on my mom's side of the family, my aunt is a religious leader as well, as a Catholic nun, who is a very, kind of well-known leader in the social services space in New York. And I got exposure to, so like I said, in the Protestant side, like community was interesting and important to me. And the Catholic side, social action was interesting to me and resonated in my teens, at a pretty young age, and social justice as a term. So I would, sometimes go to church things that had to do with the Iraq War, sanctions, and poverty and things like that. And that resonated with me because I just felt like nobody was doing enough, and I still feel that way. And so I think I just kind of followed that path, and it led me to higher education, which is not like the answer to everything by any means, but it's good at diagnosing problems for sure, and sometimes offering solutions. And so, I think those are some of the formative experiences growing up.
Yeah, it's very interesting for me to having listened in on your conversation about statues than to hear your backstories. Because you referred, Matt, to the statues and the busts and so on your campus, and and what they represent and what they don't represent. And then Kathy, your experience in that citadel really of a piece of American culture in the military. What strikes me is that as you talked earlier, the kind of internal values, the experiences, the personal side didn't come out so much. It's not like it wasn't there. You both spoke with passion, so you were there. But there's a way in which hearing your backstories gives me a sense of how you might do those conversations differently. So I'd like to shift to that now, if it's okay. You are people who care about each other and have this history together and care enough to come here and work on this. And you sounded like debaters. In fact, I'd like to invite you on one of our Brave Angels debates because you both, we give people like 4 minutes to tee it up and say what they want to say, and the other person gets that. And so you had your points. You each made multiple points, and then the other, and this is what can happen in debates, and the other picks the one they think is the weakest, to respond to, because not all points are equally strong. And so you were kind of like intellectual combatants there, and making interesting points. I was just imagining our red and blue members observing this going, yeah, Kathy, yeah, Matt, that's a good one. So it was intellectually engaging, at least for me to listen. And the personal part of two people who are family members who care about each other, sort of searching for to clarify with each other and to see where they agree and where they disagree. That was the piece that wasn't there as much, that I no doubt you both have the capability of doing. So before I turn to how you might do it differently, to what extent do what I just said make sense as my kind of analysis of the conversation?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think we're competitive. We're similar in age. I'm a little bit older. We work kind of in similar spaces, but just on opposite ends of it. And so we're alike in a lot of those ways. And so that's going to come across in both the points that we make and then the competitive passion in which we make it.
Yeah.
Because I want my team to win, right?
Well, yeah, no, that's a good point. You're sort of siblings, like, stand your ground. So Matt, what anything that I'm saying to describe your conversation ring true to you?
Yeah, I think it does. And that we were willing to go, like I said, a little bit further and not get super personal, but yeah, I think that's our style, is like being debaters for sure. Yeah. And going point for point. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. For some people, that's how they like to relate. It's just that it hasn't been working, I don't think, for the two of you. And Kathy, when you say in regular life you would stop at some point and fester, and then sometimes Matt, I'm sure you sense that she withdrawals, and you haven't been able to see something through, and then that doesn't feel great for you. So there's nothing wrong with, in my opinion, with what you did before. You debated it out. In fact, if our society had more debates like you did, we'd be better for it, because the things get clear. Nothing wrong with that. It's just that for a family relationship, as opposed to a debate society, it can leave you feeling a little bit frustrated or disconnected. So that's the point. Nothing wrong there, but there's something that might be deeper to go for. And so some tips for how to do that. One of the big ones would be to make a point and then stop and let the other person in, rather than make 8 or 9 points, which is, you each did that. I was actually glad you both did, by the way, but, because I could yell at you both on that, right? Because you both made multiple points, and that tends not to lead to a conversation then. It leads to an invitation for somebody either to make their multiple points or to go at your weakest one. And you each did that quite skillfully at times. Okay, like, okay. I mean, like Matt, when you said, well, the Capitol building is an inanimate object, whoa, okay, one for Matt, but then you'd have to come back, Kathy, and then clarify what you mean by inanimate, and so a key for having a cousin-like a conversation would be to be briefer, hand the ball back. Hand the ball back to each other, okay? And that's number one. Number two would be whoever starts, if you're prepared for the conversation, and this way you were, you'd like to bring that up, to do a softer startup than the one you did, Kathy. So the one you did was, this is crazy what they're doing out there in this world. So immediately, Matt, who actually thinks there's something to the taking down of statues, you've sort of said that's crazy. Where he's coming from is crazy, and so it's going to be hard for the other person to not, put their armor on. And so a softer startup with somewhat more personal and making a point and letting the other person in, okay, is a good way to start these conversations. So number one, the softer startup. Number two, the making a point or two, but not too many. So pass the ball back and forth. And the third one would be to be looking for some possible common ground. Something you might potentially agree on, some value you both hold, looking intentionally for something that we may connect on this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there'd be something that you potentially can connect on. Would be three things that could lead to conversations that are somewhat more personal. Is that worth a try, at least as a little experiment here?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's have the conversation again. Kathy, with you trying a more personal startup, less like bang, and making a point or two, and then Matt, you trying to look for something that you might connect on. And again, a point or two back and go back and forth, and I'll coach a little bit if that can be helpful. And again, you're not looking to agree on this. That's not the point, and you're not looking to win. If it's a personal relationship, I'm saying you're not looking to win. You're looking to explore, to understand how you are similar and how you're different. Okay. So Kathy, why don't you give it a try as a start?
I think the public policy debate around statues needs to be redirected. I think it's really not about the statue. I think it's about other things. I think it's about people being heard, and they're using the statue as a way to get themselves heard. And I think it is a mismanaged campaign by your side a little bit, and I think it's used as a weapon or as a political tool, and I think it's misguided, and I don't think it's healing our country. I think it's making more divides.
Okay. Yeah. I agree on the way you laid it out in terms of not being about the statue. And I think there's a larger story or deeper story, and about, like you said, who's heard. And I don't think there's room for debate if a statue was put up like the ones that were in mass, 100 years ago. I think it just kind of shuts off the debate. So to not allow conversation about it seems to just continue that. Yeah.
So Kathy, just a little comment on your start, which was, I think, definitely a different start. Don't put in your side, okay? Because if you're talking with each other here, it's just the two of you. You're
Right.
not representing a side, okay?
But we do. We always come to the table.
Well, that's what I'm urging
as
you.
if-
I'm urging you to avoid
Okay.
seeing each other as a side,
Okay.
but as two citizens who differ around red and blue and differ on this issue, who are wanting to talk to each other. Okay.
So I think if I could just jump in, what I tend to do is ask questions like, how do you really feel about this issue?
Yeah.
You know, and I want to dig deeper that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, you know,
that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. You could do that. I didn't have time to lay out, all of what I might say here. Yeah. I did several tips, but one of them is the clarifying question. The challenge is to make it a really clarifying question, not a gotcha, not a, I'm going to set her up here because she may not know the history. That would be the challenge. So you've looked into the history of the late 19th, early 20th century, and if you're not careful, you could use the questions as a gotcha. Where do you think those statues? Why do you think they were put up? Kind of thing. And that's Kathy. Then I think you would then tend to tighten up. But what I'd like you to do. So Matt began by joining you on something that you said is deeper than the statues. Okay. Right. He began there. Okay. I'd like to invite you if to join him in something here. Okay. See if there's something you can connect with in what he just said. Why don't you try that? And I might have to have him repeat it because we've just been talking for a little while. But is there a point that he made that you could connect with first?
Well, he said they were put up in mass at a certain time in history. And that's
so
true.
Say that to him directly. Yeah.
I hear you that they were all put up at a certain time in history, probably all by old white men. And so it wasn't necessarily a fair representation of the time. And so they wouldn't necessarily have the meaning that was intended. And so maybe they're not doing any service by being there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you did connect with what he said. That sounded like a fair connection, Matt, to what you said. Yeah. And now having said that, so that's your connection. It's not like you've changed your mind, Kathy. So you made that connection. You found something you agreed with, and now make in light of that, continue your point, if you will.
I think that the gentleman that you referenced in your example, walking through the campus at Columbia and seeing a statue that maybe represented a really dark time of slavery in our country, but the fact that this maybe young African-American man is walking by it on his way to class at Columbia shows how far we have evolved. And obviously we still have an awful long way to go, but what an awesome sight that would be for him to walk by on his way to class being like, wow, man, I have proved everything the statue stands for wrong. I mean, I think we can look at it and we don't have to rip it down. We can celebrate how far we've come as a nation from that time in history, because it is a time in history that it represents.
I definitely agree. It represents a time in history. By leaving it there to the person to say, that was something in the past, it doesn't really work for me because it's not in the past. It's still here. And either put a Frederick Douglass statue next to it. He was quoted earlier. Or have a thorough, look at what it really means. And, I was thinking too, like, this is a little outside the box, but can we make statues be impermanent? Can we have them, make them out of clay or something like that, where they would deteriorate over time because nothing's impermanent? And why do we decide to memorialize, things to stick around when we know that that's, yes, there are character flaws too, but it just represents a moment in time. And sometimes that moment of time is messed up, and sometimes there are great things to celebrate.
So once again, try for a connection first to let him know you've heard something that he said, whether you agree with it or not, to some connection, and then make your point. And we'll be finishing up here pretty soon, but you guys are doing a good job.
I mean, I do see the point of, if we continue making statues, you know, I don't know, make it up something that's biodegradable. I mean, I could see how that could have its, you know, its purpose. I also think it's a huge economic burden to be wasting taxpayer time and money debating pulling down a statue that, you know, is a pigeon resting place for most people in the country. And as someone who's fiscally conservative, that would just boggle my mind that we would waste anyone's time to do that.
Okay, so you could go on. What's different? What's different about this way of discussing? I'm not saying it has to be completely satisfying. I'm cutting you off here before you could go any deeper. But are there any things that you noticed as you did this conversation that felt different, better than the prior one? And so, Matt, could you go first on that? Anything that felt different or better?
This round, I like the point for point piece a lot better, because I think like a lot of people, we tend to just lay out like, here's what I think about everything. And that kind of just makes me and probably the other person want to back off or just resort to talking points. So I think that the alternating thing was good. Searching for common ground, I will tell you, felt good. But I have to admit that I'm still trying to win. So I'm still trying to use her language and, you know, and spin it in my direction. So
of course, if finding common ground can be a way to convince the other person that, you know, you're reasonable and maybe they listen to your other points. It's perfectly understandable. Yes. I appreciate your honesty on that one. Kathy, what felt different?
Well, the first thing is, the gentleman who did the introduction mentioned being vulnerable, and I don't like being vulnerable. And when I have to really sit back and try to connect to what he's saying, and then be able to kind of give him, to continue the language, give him a point for that, there's a vulnerability in that it makes me uncomfortable. But it does make me slow down and have to really listen to what he has to say. I didn't feel as heated inside because you had lowered the energy. It also makes it a little more boring. Like, I don't know that I would want to, you know, volley like this for an hour. I think I'd get bored and you know, want to go do something else. But it lowering the emotion as you did, lowering the tone of everything, does change the emotional output.
Yeah, and maybe an hour, maybe you don't need an hour on it, maybe you know, 5 or 10 minutes, but then you think about what each other said. I can give this input that just as an observer and a little coach here in your conversation, not only did it feel you connecting more with each other, but I thought you were both making some very interesting original points. I mean, I'm just speaking as somebody who cares about this issue in our country and finding ways that we can respectfully deal with our history, because, you know, as you're saying, this is about a bigger conversation. I just noted that this round, I heard you each say more original things, you know, kind of a little more creative things even, that I think can pop out when you are connecting with each other. As a way that a lot of times when we're debating, we're making points, almost like a PowerPoint, and sometimes when you connect with each other, there's some I don't know, there's some originality, something quite unpredictable that comes out of it. I'll just give you an example. The clay statues or something like that, you know, just as one example. And then when Kathy, you said you began this whole thing by saying there's something deeper than the statues. It's people wanting to be heard. Whoa, that's what you were saying, Matt, right? I mean, that was I think a powerful point kind of said it was Kathy speaking. It wasn't a red talking point or a blue talking point. So I just wanted to say that I think when you engage this way, there's actually some illumination that can come and some thoughts later. That's just my reaction as I listened in. So we have a reflecting team, and Matt and Kathy, your work is basically done here, okay? And so we're going to hear from Bruce, and then Terry, and then Randy and Will. And so just any reflections, what you took from our conversation. And so Bruce, if you could introduce yourself, say where you're from, red or blue, and then make your comments.
Yes, my name is Bruce France. I'm from Albany, New York, just up the Hudson River from Matt, and I lean red. So Matt and Kathy, I thought it was great, the amount of effort that you put into this. I loved it when Kathy said, I'm going to see this through. There's a real wanting to do this. And when the two of you talked about your connected family, I have an extended family that's just like this. And so it almost breaks my heart. And I love the fact that your cousins, because I have so many that are on differing sides. Some of the things that I heard you say and saw happen was almost right off the bat when Kathy started with that softer opening. Matt almost right away was shaking his head, and you could see. I mean, he was agreeing with her, and then his first comment was, "I agree with you," and so that was such a difference from the initial conversation that you had. I think that Kathy talking about vulnerability, was great to hear. That you think that that's important. And the other part that I heard from Kathy was that I had to listen to what Matt said, and that there was certainly the second conversation was so different. You could just tell that it was going in a whole different directions. And quite frankly, I'm inspired by how hard you're working at this. And that the first conversation I would have had nothing to do with. That second conversation, I wanted to jump in on it. Thank you so much, the two of you, for being here and doing this. It was great.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And Terry.
Hi there. Yeah, I a lot of what Bruce has to say, I agree with.
So tell us where you're from and red or blue lean.
Oh, sorry. I'm in Seattle, and I lean blue, although I'm fiercely independent. So, yeah, so I was really impressed with the dedication to working through this. And I really felt like during the introduction, I was very impressed with how self-aware both Kathy and Matt you seem to be in terms of kind of understanding what some of the barriers are for your communication, and recognizing some of your family background and how that affects your communication styles. And I agree. I had in my notes, the first conversation it sounded like I was listening to political pundits go back and forth, where there's no pause to to ask a question. Oh, how did you come to that? That kind of thing. And so the second time around, it started sounding more like a real conversation. And Kathy, one of the things that I noticed was you kind of opened almost with a point that Matt might make. And that really acknowledged that you're seeing some of that, what he's trying to say. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree, but it at least kind of giving that, recognition that, like, yeah, I can see where you're coming from on this, Yeah, and again, talking about the vulnerability, I'm so impressed to see you're willing to work through this together and with all of us here. Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
good.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Randy.
Okay, I thought right away that I was thinking that both of you are brave, and so that you fit very well into Braver Angels. So that was really cool. And you were honest and aware of your own family's strengths and weaknesses. And I think you brought that with you, which is the good thing about you being cousins. But what softened things for me almost immediately was when each of you talked about your different families, you know, your family, Matt, and your family, Kathy. And when I heard a little bit more about your background, it was almost like a sigh of relief. I felt, oh, okay, now I understand you. And it softened me as the listener on the outside. I suspect it might have softened you with each other. And then I think that there was really a stark difference between the pre and post discussion. I mean, both of you looked anxious the first time, and I know, Matt, you described feeling anxious. And it just sort of felt different the second time that you actually started talking. Let's see. Both of you slowed it down. You were willing to take Bill's suggestions. You both sounded more reasonable to me. And I think, like Bill said, you know, you said things that I said, oh, both sides, you make sense. So if I'm feeling that way, I suspect you felt that way about each other. And then also the point by point piece where you went point by point, you didn't throw a whole lot of things in. I could listen to you differently. It made more sense to me. And I loved your honesty at the end, Matt, that you really like to win, that it didn't feel so gratifying, because I have family members that are like that. They really want to get in there and win. And it would be very hard for them to maintain that kind of conversation. And I think, Kathy, you said something about, well, it was a little bit boring. So all of it was just really refreshing, even if, you know, maybe not always that satisfying. It was very refreshing.
Okay. Thanks, Randy. And Will.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you both. So I'm a Blue, another West Coast Seattle Blue, and my name is Will. I mean, just echoing what others have said, Matt and Kathy, I was really amazed how self-aware and articulate you both are. I mean, not only, I think Bill said this sounded like a debate, it sounded like a really effective debate to me. And I felt like each of you are people who can devastatingly well make your points. And there was a little bit of that came out in the conversation where, in a sense, the reason for disconnecting or disengaging is because fight or flight kicks in, and fight is a real fight. I also come from a really competitive family. And so I really identified with that, and particularly that thought of the heat rising, right? Because you got to do something with it. I really liked how the second conversation started. I love that idea that you're not going to make several points first, just to make a single point and then address it, because otherwise we're just making a case all the time, and that to me was really affecting. And I love the way that you both were able to open up about it. Even the point about, yeah, this just doesn't have that bite to it, you know, but it gets somewhere. And I would love to see how it goes further. So again, I'm really impressed by the both of you, particularly how well you're able to communicate, even the things that are frustrating you, even the things that you can't seem to get past, you're able to give words to those things. And I'm really impressed and inspired by this. And I really love the advice that Bill gave you and how well you implemented it. So thank you for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Will. So some final words from Kathy and Matt, just something you're taking with you from our time here today. And Kathy, do you want to go first?
I really appreciate what it feels like to go back to the mat with proper tools. I think that's incredibly important. I think we all need more of that. I think stopping and slowing down changes everything. I mean, I think that's the one thing that I think everybody, all of the panelists said in common, was that the second one felt more, maybe a little more mature, a little more responsible, because we slowed the energy down and we were able to kind of meet each other where we were, instead of trying to meet each other in these different spaces. And I think that's going to make a huge difference in all relationships I have going forward, is being self-aware enough to slow down the energy and slow down, the heat, as Matt said, to take all my relationships into a calmer direction. I think that's incredibly useful.
All right. And Matt, you've got a name with double, like going to the mat with Matt. I think that came up a couple of times here. It's pretty good. So your take homes, Matt.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like a shift happened from the medulla part of the brain, it's just like this primal thing, to like the more, evolved and elevated part where, we're being intentional. And another mat that I kind of have to do with is yoga mat, as some people call me, because in yoga we talk about namaste and seeing may the light in me see the light in you. And I think that I say that all the time when we practice yoga. I'm a teacher, but I don't think in politics I really practice it. So I feel like that's what this is about. It's recognizing the light and the common ground and the people I care about. I think I need to practice that more. So I think this was really amazing. So thank you for everyone, Braver Angels, for being part of this.
Wow, that teared me up there, that what you said at the end, because I did have the feeling you were seeing some of the light in each other. And as a couple of folks said, also, I really appreciate the honesty, but this could be a little boring. And I really do want to win, because in Brave Angels, we don't want to do some pie in the sky thing here, and most of us, if we've thought long and hard about something like you both have about this particular topic, we're not going to, after 5 minutes, say, oh, gee, I see this in common, so I give up my views. But what can happen, going back to what you said, Matt, if I'm actually listening and trying to connect, I am more persuasive, but the other person is more persuasive with me. That's the thing, and that's where change occurs. And so, Kathy, also, you said right at the beginning that your goal is to be more vulnerable to, you're trying to take the best of your family and also try to offset some of the worst, which is, for all of us, our lifelong thing. And what I saw with you is if you would, if your tendency would be to flee, do the flight after things get hard, what you did in the first one is you came out fighting, which is good. You have to know you can fight. You have to know you can fight, that you can protect your boundaries, and if necessary, you can go, pardon the expression, to the mat with Matt. If you know that, if you have that strength, then you can allow yourself to be vulnerable. You can't go from a flight to vulnerability. You have to know you can fight if you need to. But then if it's not really what you want to do, then you do the other. You connect. So really appreciate so much both of you, Matt and Kathy, for your openness, your courage, as was said, and to our reflecting team too. And the reflecting team, you kind of represent the 100 and some people who are out there. And I love what you brought as well. So, and now we're going to have Ron come back on.
Man, my final message has so many questions, and I'm glad the topic was about the statues, because I had such a conversation with some of my cousins, and it wasn't as beautiful as what I just witnessed. And so, not saying where I'd lean, because this is not about me, but my message really has twofold on it. A lot of times, who does it serve? That comes to question. And then Bill brought up about the backstory. And I heard the backstory from both of you guys. And it was so wonderful. And doing that backstory, it seems like you guys were also talking the same language. because at first you weren't. And a lot of times when we have those disagreements, we don't hear that language. And when I talk about that, caring, fairness, liberty, loyalty, authority, sanctuary, I mean, we need to speak the other side's language. And that's what we try to do here at the Braver Angels. And you guys did a great thing. And I'm going to go out the limb and say, you need to join Braver Angels. And man, you guys know how to debate, just like my hero, what I mentioned earlier, Frederick Douglass. And that's what he was all about. Bringing, even though he was a slave, he wanted to bring everybody together so we could help this country with our divide. And so you are a perfect example. And thank you, Kathy, for bringing up vulnerability, because I've been working on my vulnerability every day. And Matt, thank you. It sounds like you're listening to your cousin, which is so sweet, because I love my cousins. It was an excellent conversation today. And so what I would like for everyone to do is go to Braver Angel, the chat room, if you're new to Brave Angels, and look at and get the address and go to our webpage. We have a lot of one-on-ones. We have workshops. We also have film study. We have tons of different things that you can get involved with. And you might even get in a one-on-one with me, Ron McFarland, which would be an excellent experience. I would love to have one with Matt and Kathy. That would be great. And for information about all that, again, is in our chat room. And Randy will now prepare a song. And this is a time when we want your feedback. And if you look in the chat or look in the screen, there's a QR. You can take your phone out. You can take and click on your phone and capture, and it'll take you to the survey. And also, if you don't have that technology, you can go into the chat and go to the link. We're going to give you enough time so you can start there. We'll give you about 3 to 4 minutes, so you can actually take the survey. Be honest. Give us the feedback on everything. And my smiley face will read it as I drink my coffee. So anyway, Randy, go ahead and start the music.
I will not be divided. Neighbor, I'll not be divided from you, nor race, nor religion, nor love that you choose. Our country is broken, we have work to do. I will not be divided from you, no, I will not be divided from you. These words that divide us are carefully planned to raise a clenched fist and draw lines in the sand. But we all live under a far greater truth. I will not be divided from you. No, I will not be divided from you. Our country is broken, we have work to do. I will not be divided from you. No, I will not be divided from you.
All right, what a beautiful song. Finally, if you have a loved one that would like to volunteer for a future event, let us know. There is a link in the chat box for you to volunteer. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I look forward to you uh, attending another Love one, Healing the Divide, here on Braver Angels. It is such a pleasure to have so many folks giving up their Saturday morning to listen to a lot of different great ideas. Thank you.